Another question is, what do you believe the gospel is? So the gospel means good news. What is the good news? And just have them define it. It's rare to find one who defines it, I think, in a way that matches what the Bible says. The one Westers who don't think other nations can be saved, if they're honest with you, they'll turn to Luke 4. And you may say, where's this going? I'll show you. They'll turn to Luke 4. And then in Luke 4, they'll have Jesus reading from Isaiah 61, which he does. And the Bible says he handed the scroll back to the attendant. Remember that? Shows you, by the way, Jesus was literate and knew Hebrew. Because there's people, Jesus was illiterate. He's reading from a Hebrew scroll. Well, that's made up, but it shows you he knew, right? And then he says, this is fulfilled in your hearing, right? If you read Isaiah 61, he stops. He focuses on the stuff that he comes to do this time and then does not proceed to the stuff he comes to do the second time. But if you read all of Isaiah 61, there's a part in there that has what scholars call the submission motif. The submission motif. And I'm going to show you what I mean so that you can know, and you'll say, oh, okay. Starting in verse 5 of Isaiah 61. So Jesus read from here. And this is answering the question. I'm going to go back to it. Strangers shall stand and tend your flocks. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers. But you shall be called the priests of the Lord. They shall speak of you as the ministers of our God. You shall eat the wealth of the nations, and in their glory you shall boast. Instead of your shame there shall be a double portion. Instead of dishonor they shall rejoice in their lot. Therefore in their land they shall possess a double portion, for they shall have everlasting joy. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrong. I will faithfully give them their recompense and make an everlasting covenant with them. And it goes on and talks about all these different things, such as verse 4, I forgot verse 4. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. Now, you should see that, okay, Isaiah is talking about some version of a restored Israel. That's the main emphasis you should get from that, I believe. And people can debate exactly, did that happen? Is that going to happen? There's all kinds of questions there. We'll go off if we get bogged down there. But the one Westers see this. That is showing you how the other nations are going to be our slaves in the kingdom. So see where that's the submission motif of where there are passages in the Bible where it portrays other nations as being in service to Israel. So what do we do with that? So different people will do different things with that. Ultimately, I think the answer should be Christological. Everyone does not agree with this, even other Christians, where there is some immediate fulfillment. For example, when Israel comes back after exile and things like that. And I could show you some verses related to that in Ezra, because that's when they come back. It says they came back with servants. Hebrewites don't usually accept that. They don't think it's enough. I think it's Ezra 165, the verse I'm talking about. It's at the end of Ezra 1. You'll see it. But ultimately, even that is a snapshot of what it's ultimately about, which is bondservants to Christ. So to me, it's ultimately Christological, because the submission motif is in other places too, where you have other nations being portrayed as submitted, like in a militaristic way. So what do you do with that now? Hebrew Israelites of the One West variety who think other nations can't be saved think this means other nations are going to serve us for all eternity in the kingdom. And the reason why I went down that rabbit trail is because they'll say, so Jesus is reading from about the good news in Luke 4, and he read from Isaiah 61, and he's doing this when he comes back. So the good news, and it depends how crass they are, some will use colorful language here, the good news is we're going to be kicking other nations' butts for all eternity. If they're the One Rest variety, some will say, this is just showing that in the future, other nations will recognize their proper place and role, and it'll be like a butler relationship. You know, think Bruce Wayne and Alfred or something like that. That's the kind version, right, of it. So you're still, and when we say other nations, they have different views of what other nations constitute. So that's where you could say, okay, who do you believe constitutes Israel and what constitutes the other nations? Another question. If they say Black, Native American, Hispanic, That means they hold the 12 tribe chart and they're one Westers, usually the more radical kind. Oh, sorry. If you ask them who is Israel and they say black, Native American, and Hispanic, they're usually of the more radical, you're going to service forever variety, and they have this strange rainbow coalition version of Israel, right? Black, Native American, Hispanic. If you wanted to get scientific, which a lot of them deny, we all have what are called haplogroups. And we'll just talk about on our paternal, that's our father's side. When you have a 12 tribe chart that has the Seminole Indians with Jamaicans, with people in South America, you're putting people with radically different haplogroups together. There's no way they descend from the same father. Literally, it's impossible. Native Americans primarily have a haplogroup called Q. Inuits, they don't like the term Eskimo, so I say Inuit because it's an offensive term. It means fish eater, I guess. So go with Inuit. They have mainly C. Most black Americans have E, especially something called E1B1A. These are what geneticists have labeled haplogroup groupings. And so Q is the big one, and then there's things like underneath it. C is the big one. So it shows you your a male progenitor. So if it's your male progenitor, it's talking about your primary one, your haplogroup, because you have all kinds of other influences. This relates to something called autosomal DNA. It's these other little things that may relate to other ancestors, not the male progenitor. That's showing you who you came from. So if yours is Q, if a Native American's is Q and a Black American's is E, they cannot have the same father ancestor. I don't mean direct father. I mean going all the way. They cannot. It's impossible because it's two different haplogroups. The DNA shows you. So, and on the mother side there's different issues there, but most of them just deny all that and say, well, the Jews own the testing labs. They'll say something like that a lot of times. No joke, that's what they say to me all the time. And who owns those labs? But you haven't looked into it. Yeah, actually you have. It's not just Jews. Mormons like them too, because Mormons are into genealogies. Anyways, if they say only black folks, they're usually actually less radical, and they usually have a gentler view of other nations, even though they not deny Hispanic and Native Americans can be on the chart. So there's a group called Israel of God. They're black-only Israelites, but they will call me a brother because they still think I can come in through them. Through them. They essentially act as a mediator instead of Jesus. They deny they do that. So those are some diagnostic questions, but you got to understand, any group you've dealt with, it takes a while, right? Has anyone witnessed to a Mormon over a sustained period of time? If you have, at first you're like, oh, this guy's a Christian. And then you start studying their belief and like, oh, shoot, they believe that? Oh, what? So it'd be similar with a lot of Hebrew Israelites, and it takes a while a lot of times. So it's just showing you the entry level. But if the Hebrew Israelite was only saying, I think I know who my ancestors are, it would just be a matter of almost science and history there. But even when they say that's all they're saying, that's not only what they're saying. Because they start automatically pushing the law on people and denying key elements of the faith.